Hey there, everybody. It's Miss Cindy from No Sweat Nature Study Live, and I am here with a very special guest. I'm going to interview Mr. Richard Fink about some animal communication sounds. Now, interestingly, he's an expert on human vocals, but he's also studied the way some animals produce sounds too. So I am so very excited to introduce you to him, and we're going to have a very cool chat. All right, Mr. Richard, what can you tell us about yourself?
Hello, Cindy. Thanks for having me, first of all. So I am, as you said, an expert in the field of human voice. So I'm actually excited and a little nervous talking about something outside of just this anatomy, something that I've been doing for 25 years, working with singers and speakers around the world. And let's see, what else about myself? So I have a company called Throga, and that's where we specialize the technique in vocal development for humans. And I have the Guinness World Record for the longest vocal note ever held by a human, which is 2 minutes and 1 second, a single pitch on a single breath. So it's kind of a fun little fact about
That
me.
is super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's about it. That's my life. I just love singing and speaking and talking about the larynx, which we're going to get into a little bit about.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about that. Okay, well, it is good to meet you. I know all of the folks listening are really glad to meet you too. So when I was getting ready for this interview, I started really noticing all of the animal sounds around me because it's early spring. In fact, it's not even officially spring yet when we're recording this, but there are already plenty of birds that have migrated back to where I live in Kentucky. They are chattering and singing, and I know that their communication right now is to try to find some mates so that we can have some new baby birds. I also am just beginning to hear in the pond down the hill on my farm some spring peepers, which are a type of frog, and they make all kinds of racket in the evening for their mating communication. So before you and I have a discussion about communication, I would love it if the kiddos would pause either the podcast or the video and think of all the different animal sounds they can possibly think of. And kiddos, I want you to think about it in terms of the sound they make. So I might say tweet for the birds, croak for the frogs. There are other words I could use, but I want you to stop and pause for just a sec and see how many of those sounds you can name. Okay, click pause now. All righty. So I'm going to name a few sounds that I thought of during that break. How about bark, growl, howl, whine, whinny, meow, cluck, screech? Oh, you guys, I could go on, but that's not why we're here right now. Right now, we're here to ask Mr. Fink if he would tell us about one or two of his favorite animals and how they're using their voices to communicate. Are you ready to do that for us?
So, yeah. So, of course, like you said, there's all these different words that we can use to describe different sounds. And there's so many animals. But the reality is you can use 100 different words to describe even one animal. Like you said, frogs. There's so many different sounds that frogs create. There's so many different words that we could use to describe the birds and what sounds that they make and the different reasons they make sound. So actually what I'd love to start with, if you're okay with this, is I'm gonna get a little nerdy. I'm going to talk about the anatomy of sound and how we produce sound, not just as humans, but the animals themselves, and then how our brain actually interprets the sound.
Wow. Let me tell you something about No Sweat Nature Study. We love to get nerdy.
Okay, beautiful.
Love learning science. So that would be fantastic.
Okay, perfect. So what I want to mention first is sound is actually air molecules bouncing around, creating what's called a waveform. So if I were to take, I'm just going to grab my guitar because it's kind of like a nice little visualization here. So if I were to pluck a string, you might be able to see a blur. This bottom string is vibrating really, really fast. I'm going to pluck it again. As that moves around, it's pushing air, creating a sound wave. Now, we can't actually see it, but we can hear it. Without air, there is no sound. Did you know when you watch movies and you see an explosion in outer space and we hear that big explosion? That sound that they put in the movies isn't real because there's no air in outer space to push around. It's actually completely silent. So we need air to push air molecules around, and then that enters our eardrum and it bounces against what's called a tympanic membrane. And it's just kind of like a circle, like a disc that's really sensitive. And as air pushes on that, it pushes on tiny little bones in our ear, and then it gets into what's called a cochlea, which looks like a snail. I'm going too far in, but basically our ear interprets that vibration into a chemical reaction, which is sends a nerve pulse to our brain, and then our brain finally says, "Oh, that was a guitar string, I think," right? Because we learn that sound over time, we can identify it. So it takes a lot of steps in order for us to recognize even what a sound is in the first place. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I want you to understand why sound is happening and how to interpret that, especially when you go out into nature and you hear all these things, like why are these sounds even existing? So for a human, if you rest your fingers right here on your throat, I'm gonna have you hum, just go, you can do any note. It can be pick any sound you want. Do you feel the vibration? You feel that? So inside, right behind this little bump, inside the larynx is your vocal folds, and they're about half the size of your eyelids. They're really small, and they come together like this. So as air leaves your lungs and passes between them, they vibrate, pushing around the air molecules, just like the string when it's plucked, pushing on air molecules. And that vibration creates sound, and then it's cultivated and expanded in our throat and our mouth, and then it leaves our body and creates a So that's how we create sound. And frogs and birds also have a version of vocal folds. So when they create sound, there's something in their body that's vibrating, pushes the air molecules around, and then it's expanded, and then that's what we hear. And then our brain hears that sound, and we say, oh, that's a bird. Oh, that's a frog. And the closer you listen, and the more you learn, the more you identify, oh, that's that specific type of bird. That's that specific type of frog. And that takes time. Do you have any questions so far, Sydney? I know I'm kind of like throwing a lot out at once.
I do not have any questions. I think that was a brilliant explanation. So thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
Of course. So one of the things I wanted to point out what was your initial question? Because I have all sorts of stuff I want to talk about.
Okay. Well, we can talk about lots of things. In fact, we might have to have a little series of these so that we can talk about so many things. My initial question was, can you tell us about a specific animal or two and how they make sounds, maybe what that sound is even purposed for? Because animals will make sounds for various types of communication.
Yes. So like you said, the springtime, that's usually where animals are looking for love and they're attracting mates. But they also make sounds to protect their young, for example. So they can do threatening sounds to ward off predators that might be coming, or even humans. If we're just going for a regular walk, they don't know why we're there and they want to protect their young or their eggs. So they make some squawks or sounds to try to get us to move away. But it's really interesting about birds in particular, female birds, because they can create so many complex sounds, they can have their own unique call that their young can identify, which is really special in the animal kingdom. We can do that as humans too, where baby can recognize mama's voice, birds can do that too. A lot of them can, not all of them. So there's so many complex patterns that can be created that their young can identify. If they're going too far away from home, they can literally call them back. So that's a sound you might hear. Another one is to show dominance. A lot of male frogs and male birds it's like, this is my territory, this is my pond, this is my leaf that you have to stay away from. And so they may croak or generate a sound that is showing dominance. This is mine, stay away. They can also make sounds to warn. So not just to warn maybe a human coming too close to their home, but also to warn others in the area. You're going to see, again, birds and squirrels and raccoons and all these different animals might produce a sound to warn others something is coming. So sometimes there's a collective environment that ecosystem is so fragile, they're all looking out for each other as well as specific predators. And birds are even more interesting again because they've been known to sing and produce sound simply to sing and produce sound. In humans, when we sing, if we're really sad, we might feel like the need to sing a song, or if we're really happy, we might sing. And the reason why we do that sometimes is because it literally makes us feel better. It has healing powers. The brain produces different chemicals like dopamine and serotonin that bathes the brain and our feelings in our body to feel better. And we think birds do that too. There's something about that repetition of joy in what they're doing. So there's all sorts of reasons that these sounds may exist when you're going out there and hearing different sounds. And it's kind of fun to think about what sound that is and why it's happening.
Yeah, that's super fun to think about. So let me tell you, just this morning, we have some border collies, and of course, dogs typically bark or growl. They might even howl, and all of those have different reasons. Well, right now, we're dealing with one of our border collies who is kind of whimpering, almost a cry. And so that has communicated to us without words that there is something that's not okay with this particular dog right now. And so we're trying to use the clues that we can see or hear or feel through other senses besides just hearing him, as to what's going on, because his communication style obviously can't speak to us. And yet all of those sounds are clues for us.
Mm-hmm.
And those sounds are clues for other animals too. So you were mentioning when animals are territorial and they don't want another animal to enter their territory, that scream doesn't just communicate to another. Let's pretend like it's a wildcat. We did a class about wildcats not too long ago, and they're very territorial. Let's pretend like it's a wildcat. Not only is that screech or scream or growl or however that particular cat communicates, telling the other cats, you better stay away from my territory, but that's also communicating to me. If I hear it, it's communicating to the birds, it's communicating to the squirrels, any other animal that's in the area is knowing that there is at least something that's not okay and we need to be careful. So the animal communication, I think, is fascinating that, another wildcat would obviously know exactly what that cat is saying, but the rest of the animals and us, we also have clues that is a danger call of some sort. Very cool.
It is. And sometimes other animals may not even be able to hear the sounds being produced. Like we mentioned earlier, depending on their ear and their brain, they may only be able to sense a certain number of frequency. Okay, so frequency is, let me grab my guitar again. So if I play this low E string again, we call that a low note, right? So this takes a thicker string. Can you see how this is like a thick string and this is a thin string? The larger the mass, the slower the vibration. So if you have vocal folds or any sort of sound that is moving slow, it's going to create a lower frequency. And an animal such as maybe a hummingbird, or think of it like a really small bird or a really small toad, may not have the sensory ability to hear a really low. Now they'll hear this note. This isn't too low, but like an elephant, for example, huge vocal folds, and they can create sound that's even lower frequency than the human ear can hear. But another elephant 100 miles away can actually hear it. So we have to have the brain and the ear capacity to identify what that is. So you're saying like one wildcat has a specific message for their fellow wildcats, but there's only a range of animals that are going to be able to pick up on that. And that's why there are other clues. Like you said, there's visual. Like a squirrel will kind of like kick their tail to warn visually something that maybe another animal can't hear, or maybe they don't want to vocalize because something is so close.
Yeah.
So there's different
And
ways.
you know, really interestingly on that same topic, so we call those defensive mechanisms. Guess what, nature study kiddos are going to know that. Many animals have multiple defense mechanisms because they need to be able to communicate in multiple ways.
Yes.
So that the other animals or humans get the message. So if they couldn't hear something, perhaps they can see there's a tail thumping or a tail up in the air, or they can smell, there is a stinky smell. I don't want anything to do with this. So yeah, communication isn't just voice. Isn't that cool?
And even more, there's two types of a sound that is generally used in the animal kingdom, which is vocalization, something we just talked about a little bit. That's where the vocal folds vibrate. Birds are a little bit different, actually. I'm going to explain that in a second, because that's really an interesting thing too. But we also have mechanical sounds. So there's vocalization and mechanical. Mechanical sounds, something humans could do. We could clap to get attention. We can do that, and that's where the folds aren't vibrating, but we can use other things in our body to generate a sound, to give warning or add a musicality to it. And you're going to find this in other animals as well, particularly non-vertebrate. So we get into like the insects. So crickets can be really loud. They don't have vocal folds. They don't even have lungs to store air. Like frogs and birds and squirrels and raccoons and all of them, they actually have lungs that they can take air in, and that's called their actuator, which is a fancy word for something to put something in motion. So they take air in, and then when they spend the air, that's when it goes against the folds that vibrate that we talked about. So we have actuation and vibration. So frogs have that, birds have that, squirrels have that, elephants have that, all mammals have that. But insects actually take oxygen in through tiny pores under their scales and things like that. Scales the right word? I'm not sure. So not my area of expertise, but they can feed the cells of their body with oxygen directly, not through an inhalation process that we do as humans. So therefore, they can't really they don't have that actuator, that air pressure to generate a vocalization. So instead, they have different things that they could use to either rattle or scrape. So a cricket, for instance, have certain what are those called? Striations? I don't think that's a word. I might be making up a word. We might have to dig into what that word actually is.
Well, so when I don't know something, I always tell everyone, you get to research that.
Yes.
Because we can't all know everything all the time.
Not at all.
So that's a job for the kids to do right now.
Perfect. So I want you to look up it's a really fancy word that starts with S and has at least 3 syllables. Okay. So on their legs, they have these serrated edges. Okay. And when they rub against it, they get that, like that really, that loud chirping sounds. They're not producing that with vocal folds or a voice like we as humans. It's a percussive instrument that they use to communicate. And a lot of insects do it that way. And some animals like slugs and worms produce no sound, and they can only generate a feeling of vibration through the ground. So whatever contact they have with the ground or a leaf or whatever, they can feel vibration throughout the body, but they can't call out in a way, in the same way that other animals can.
Yeah, and whiskers and things like that
Mm,
are really good at indicating
that
vibrations and things.
tactile feedback that they get
Yeah,
into their body. Yes.
which is another form of communication. So, Mr. Fink, this has been fascinating. So fascinating. We're going to have to come back and do another conversation at some point
Awesome.
because this has been so much fun. Um, in No Sweat Nature Study, the membership, we do live classes. Well, they're recorded classes too about topics like this. So you might have to come in and do one of those with us sometime too.
Sounds fun.
I would love that so much.
Sounds fun.
And by the way, we have some recorded classes in there on bird songs, on music in nature. We cover wetlands, any kind of wetlands. We've got ponds and vernal pools. We have riparian zones. Those are great places if a family wants to go and just kind of sit and listen. Wetlands are a great place
Mm.
to hear vocalization of many animals. Okay, so if anyone is listening and not a member, that's nosweatnaturestudy.com. You can find everything you need there. But before we let you go, I know you do something pretty cool. I would love for you to tell us about what your job is and where people can find you if they're interested in that.
Of course. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a vocal coach, so I specialize in the human voice as much as I'm fascinated with all the other animal sounds too. So I help people learn how to sing. And the philosophy is if you can speak, you can sing. There's a misnomer out there that feel like, oh, you're born with the gift of singing or you're not. And that's not true. It's just like if you can walk, you can dance. If you can speak, you can sing. So it's something that can be crafted and something that we have on our website at throga.com. That's THROGA.com. We actually have a homeschool course called the Vocal Gym. And it counts as a full fine arts credit if that's something you're interested in. But in the very least, what I encourage everybody to do is take a free vocal assessment. So if you go to the website, you answer a bunch of questions, and it actually shows you your strengths and weaknesses as a vocalist. And it gives you some exercise that you could do to further develop that and just explore your voice.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys will check that out. It was Throga.com.
Throga, yes.
Throga. I was making sure I spelled that correctly because it's on
I
your
appreciate
shirt
that.
as well. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there it is. That's the perfect visual for us. Okay, well, we will have you back in some form or fashion.
Awesome.
I thank you so much for being here. And you guys, I hope you've enjoyed this special episode. What a great discussion we've had. I challenge you to get outside and hear some animal sounds today. All right, thanks for being here.
I love it. Thank you.